of this academic year. It is a pleasure to have all of you all here. Before I introduce our presenter this afternoon, I want to introduce Tony Crocio, who's sitting just on the other side. Some of you know Tony. He has done much work over the years with foundation, community development, a variety of kinds of things. He and I have been partners in the study that we're doing together with Spend Down Foundation. So Tony is doing the interviewing at Atlantic Philanthropy, and I'm doing the interviewing at the Time Foundation, both of which are spending down in the same time frame. And we are working on a book together on the subject of spend down and comparing spend downs with perpetual foundations and strengths and weaknesses and things of that nature. So he is now come to join us on a part-time basis as Associate Director of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy and Civil Society, in charge of research. That's his title. And so I would please join me in welcoming Tony. Okay, as you know, before we introduce the presenter, the custom is to go around the table and ask each person here to present themselves, so the presenter will know who she is talking to today. So, if I may then, let me just start. We'll start over here and go around the table this way. Please.
I'm Veronica Hemingway. I'm Senior Donor Engagement Officer at Triangle Community Foundation.
I'm Sandra Rodriguez. I'm Director of Donor Engagement at Triangle Community Foundation.
And I'm Gloria O'Keefe, also with Triangle Community Foundation.
Notice you all sit together.
I'm Lauren Moore. I'm a Major Business Officer here at the Public Policy School and a 2002 graduate of the Public Policy program.
I'm Daryl Childers. I'm a second-year Master of Public Policy student, and I'm also an intern with Triangle Community Foundation.
I'm Mark Benson, and I'm with the Keenan Funds in Chapel.
I'm Max Rose, and I'm with MDC.
I'm Alice Buell. I'm a Family Foundation consultant with Lansford Gersick, and I'm also a senior fellow for the National Center for Family Philanthropy.
I'm Lance Buell. I'm with FIRG, although 30 years ago I was in philanthropy at a place called Standard Oil of Ohio, now BP America.
I'm Jerry McCarthy, and this is the first time I've been in public to say I retired June 1st from the Virginia Environmental Endowment of Philanthropy that specialized in environmental grant making.
As far as we're concerned, you're still active.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel.
I'm Eileen Wilhelm. I'm a philanthropic consultant to family offices, as well as work with Geneva Global on projects in international development.
I'm Wendy Karan. I am the head of business development for Duke in China, where I am frequently finding myself in conversations with Chinese wealthy individuals who are really interested in family philanthropy. So they're interested in learning from the U.S.
Great to have you back. On one of your trips to the United States.
Yeah, well, this is the best thing going, worth coming to.
I'm Kristen Goss. I'm on the faculty here at the Stanford School.
And Kristen is also the director of the San Francisco Center in Washington, D.C.
The program.
Well, since you're the director, I don't know what to call it. I've always called it the center. I've always
Title inflation.
If you know undergraduates who want to spend a semester in D.C., send them to me.
Yes.
I'm Tom Lambeth, and many years ago, Virginia Marie, who will be known to you all as Jenny this afternoon, took me, raw material that I was, and trained me so I was qualified to work for people like Mary Menno Castle. What she didn't do was tell me how to leave, so I'm still working for Mary Menno Castle. And I was a senior fellow, very, very, very senior at the Z. Smith Roberts Foundation.
I'm Buck Goldstein, the University Entrepreneur in Residence at the University of North Carolina, and I'm also a trustee of a family foundation.
I'm Mary Mountcastle with the Lisa Reynolds Foundation.
I'm Sharon Roos. I'm with the Center for Responsible Lending here in Durham, which is affiliated with South.
I'm Debbie Goldstein. I'm also with the Center for Responsible
You got here just in time to introduce yourself. I couldn't think of a better entrance.
I'm on the right.
Nice to have you, Bob. It's a pleasure. Yes.
And then
Hey, Joel, I'm not on the panel, but they want me to pass up the state office.
Mr. Costa. I am the Executive Director of the A.J. Fletcher Foundation.
David, we're glad to have you here. Pleasure. You pride yourself as on the family. Cassie?
Oh, I have to say something. Okay, I'm Cassie Lewis. I am the assistant in Haman Center for Ethics for Joel Fletcher.
I'm Mary Grimm, I'm with the Center for Sustainable Activity.
I should say that if you notice the mail, I don't want to say mailing, that shows you how linear I am, but the emails that we've been sending out, Mary redesigned and to just make it much more vivid and much more lively. And I thank Mary, take this opportunity to thank Mary for that. She is working, she has also actually received a promotion and is working now on trying to strengthen our website and in a variety of ways. And she and Tony are working together on that here. So Mary has been promoted and deserving. So
Thank you.
congratulations on your promotion.
Girl, Mary.
It really is a pleasure to have Jenny Esposito here. I remember meeting Jenny Esposito when she was at the Council on Foundations, running the Council on Foundations Committee on Family Philanthropy. This was at the time when there were struggles in the Council on Foundations between those people who were engaged in thought that family philanthropy was maybe not. Well, I don't think I should get into the struggles. In any event, there were struggles between various committees in the foundation. And Jenny created, in that role, she created the largest conference of family foundation people in the country, while still at the Council on Foundations. And ultimately, this is my interpretation of it. Jenny's operation became so big that the council decided that they couldn't handle it anymore. So Jenny then went out and raised money to start the National Center for Family Philanthropy, of which I think Tom Lambert was the board chair.
Founding chair.
Founding chair. Excuse me,
Yeah.
I forgot. We don't want you to go unrecognized. The founding board chair of it. I think that Mary is on. Mary, are you on the board? You were the board chair as well. So Jenny then started from scratch with the organization, which has really become the leading focus of family philanthropy, advice, research in the country. It's now 10 years? 16 years. Time flies by. Any event, if you don't know the center's website, it's really worth going there because there are a lot of publications about family philanthropy there, all both nitty-gritty problem-solving ones as well as wonderfully inspiring publications about things that families have done and ways of going about doing it. So when anybody comes to me and says, from a family foundation, and says, I need advice, I need to know about what the best practices are with respect to intergenerational involvement in philanthropy, or I need to know about the best practices of something else, I say, well, you've solved your problem. There's one person you go talk to, and if you get her to give you advice, you have the gold standard. And I do believe she offers the gold standard in this particular field, which is, frankly, most foundations in the country are family foundations. If you think about it for a minute, every foundation is started primarily as a family foundation, with very few exceptions. And so, and it is still the case that most of the members of the Council on Foundation are family foundations. So it's a very important part of philanthropy. It's a very important part of the social structure of America that families engage together in philanthropy across generations. And the expert on the field is Jenny, and it's a real honor to welcome you here to enlighten us on the subject and to stimulate questions, ask questions. We have a lot of people, as you can see in the room, who are engaged in one way or another in doing philanthropy or in studying philanthropy. So the floor is yours, and I welcome with great enthusiasm and great admiration.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Joel. This is one of those things to go put on the resume if I ever kept one. That I was invited by Joel and the center here at Duke to come and speak. So I'm really, really honored to be here, and thank you all for making your way here. When we started talking about what I might bring up today, it wasn't a big trip to get us to the notion that we wanted to talk about what was happening in perpetuity. As you've heard, there's just a lot of interest, there's a lot of really good scholarship going on about that. And as a matter of fact, the National Center and the Center for Strategic Philanthropy here at Duke have been engaged in a co-sponsored project to chronicle the spend down of the Erwin Sweeney Miller Foundation. It's being conducted by Alice Buell, who has been both the advisor to the family and the writer of that piece. So I really am excited that this fall we will be publishing Alice's work and as a joint effort. I wanted to, though, couch this in the fact that it's not really the brand new subject that so many people have thought it to be. We've been talking about whether foundations should exist in perpetuity since foundations were founded. And of course, those of you who are foundation history geeks like me, you've read something of Julius Rosenwald and the notion that this is the man who, Sears Roebuck, entrepreneur, really truly believed that it was the job of the wealthy to give and spend the philanthropic money in your lifetime while you could participate. Don't wait till after, you can leave it to somebody else. And he also thought it was his mission in life to help share that, theory. It didn't take off as much as he might have hoped, but it was something he truly believed in. But there have been times where this has come back up. With John Hay Whitney, we saw someone who believed in setting the 10 years after his death sunset, and most people believe this had a lot to do with family issues and who he did and didn't want to leave this to. In the case of the much better publicized Aaron and Irene Diamond, it was done for programmatic reasons. So there have been moments in our history where there was a big sort of spotlight on all of this. But why did it stay dormant for, the better part of 50 years? Well, the first answer is blame all the lawyers. With all due respect to those of you who are lawyers. The truth is, in advising their wealthy clients, most lawyers recommended the private foundation vehicle, and they just presumed that you wanted it because you wanted it to exist in perpetuity. In most cases that we can sort of identify and document, it wasn't even a topic for conversation. It wasn't a question on the checklist. It was just who got it. So that was a big part of it. And I also think that the rest of the field viewed those few people who were choosing this as sort of idiosyncratic, that they were aberrations. It was interesting, but they really were in this little section. And then the last, which is only a tiny bit defensive, much of philanthropic practice in theory has been dominated by the practice of independent foundations. So when they studied foundations, most books were being studied for independent foundations. And one of the things I find very interesting, and you might think about as you're doing your work, is this conversation, even now in the 21st century, has pretty much been limited to family foundations. No one talks about whether the Carnegie endowment should go out of business. So I keep going into conversations and mentioning that, and everybody agrees with it, but no one does want to talk about it. So I think now that family philanthropy has taken a different role on the stage, and I think that there's been more scholarship and more efforts to really understand what's going on, I think that is changing the way we understand the field, making a big difference. So why is it a matter of urgency now? The first is there are so many giving options that people really do have the opportunity to be thoughtful about vehicle and what's attached to that vehicle in terms of opportunity. The interesting thing for me here, as family foundations, and a lot of this doesn't just apply to the family foundation vehicle, but as they are thinking more and more about not existing in perpetuity, we're looking at donor-advised funds. Many of them are looking more and more at whether they can get perpetuity out of the donor-advised fund model. Many community foundations in the country have changed their policies from 1 or 2 or whatever donor advised generations, to allowing that to exist in perpetuity. I don't know what the triangle policy is. Is it perpetuity?
It is.
It is, okay. So, and when that vehicle first started, it was a sort of 1 or 2 and done kind of thing. That's changed. But giving options really have changed the whole way we think about advising donors. One of the things we saw in a lot of the entrepreneurs of the late 20th century is they had no interest, and that's probably kind. They had a fear of institution building, of perpetual institutions. And when you're 24, 25, I sort of understood that. I mean, one of my favorite early presentations at the National Center was going to Microsoft's campus, because they wanted me to talk to about 100 members of their team that were about to go from $80,000 a year programmers to multimillionaires. And they wanted someone to give a little philanthropic push to all these millionaires. And, you know, and I really was staring at some significant baby faces. But there was this big head nodding when they said, we don't want something that's supposed to be around. And that was a real moment for me. The second one, which may be less well understood except by those of you who come from multi-generational family foundations, is that third-generation foundations are finding out that perpetuity was really nice in theory, and it's really hard to make it happen. The practices that guided entrepreneurs and even the second generation aren't going to apply to a third generation that grew up in different places with different parents and different kinds of education and values, even religions, what you name it. And one of the things they're thinking about is, how do we make this a true shared effort? And there are lots of options for it. And as we'll talk about a little bit more, and when that can happen, are there legal or other structural options for us so that we don't have to do this together. One of the more politically charged reasons for the emphasis is the emphasis on preserving donor intent. The notion that if you really want to know that what you care about and what you want to see funded is going to be done, you're going to do it in your lifetime or your lifetime plus some, you know, modest addition. And the donor intent issue has been well documented, and it's a source of some concern for some donors. I don't want to know that this is going to do something completely different. For a lot of people, this is a very positive and constructive decision to say, we want to make a programmatic impact, and we want to make that impact in a period of time. We talked about Aaron and Irene Diamond. They knew that certain kinds of research, advances in education, prevention, hospice, and research were not going to happen in the area of AIDS if they did not funnel that money into that cause in a 10-year window. And they did. And it's been shown that advances would not have happened without those significant, I can't remember, but I think it was about $160 million at the time they decided to spend it down. Okay. That's what I thought. Now, because my experience with families is that they all know they don't want to be told what they should do, but they do want to know what others are doing. One of the big things that took this right into the stratosphere was the Gates announcement, that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was going to have a limited lifespan. And some of us have been waiting for that announcement for a long time. It was very thoughtfully done. But I did 2 separate interviews with Bill Gates Sr. In a lot of the formation of that foundation, and he said one of the guiding principles always was the fact that Bill did not want this to be a perpetual institution. He had to be sort of taking, I think that his term was kicking and screaming to the notion that a foundation was even going to be set up, a separate vehicle. But it was definitely going to be something of importance to him. And it clearly is, because the original announcement said that the foundation would close 50 years after the death of the founding trustees, and they've recently changed that to 25. So, and that's a lot of money to spend in that window. So what are the choices that a donor has when it comes to what we sort of are, this big umbrella of perpetuity? The first one is that they can choose to exist forever. And I'll just give some examples of this as we go along through the presentation, but I want to just sort of sum up all these choices. I also want to make it very clear that, notice I say, founders can choose to exist forever. What subsequent generations do, especially for those set up in an incorporated model, can be very different from what founders may have intended. And the story that Alice is going to talk about is one of those cases. Alice can take exception with this. I don't think it's something that the founders would have had a problem with, but it wasn't decided by the founders. They can choose to sunset. You set a closing date, it's almost always at inception. You know that's going to happen. Another paper that will be coming out in the next year, we're doing a webinar on it in the next month, in November, is the story of the Eckerd Family Foundation. This is Eckerd Drugs. And from the beginning, they knew that 2014 was going to be the end. And so we've been working with them to chronicle that story as well. So that's the sunset, decided it at inception. The next one is spend down. You regularly exceed the 5% payout, knowing that that may shorten the foundation's life. In fact, it may be intentional, but there's not a concern about we want to just make the 5% payout and then we're going to close up shop when it comes to grant making. In this case, first of all, family foundations, some of you may know, regularly pay out a greater percent of their assets than other kinds of foundations. But in this case, it's not a guide for a spend down foundation. If we had 18% worth of opportunities in the area we care about, we're taking it. And by the way, for some of you, I know this is heretical, but because there are those who are counting it down anyway. There's another community too. Spend out. You plan specifically to spend the assets in a set period of time. This comes somewhere along the way which you say, you know what, for whatever reason, programmatic, family, whatever it may be, we think we need to limit the life of this foundation and you spend it out. I want to add into this mix because I think it is something worth paying attention to, and that's the practice to split up. And when you see the words formally or informally, formally is a case where the foundation goes through the legal process, which in some states can be really difficult, unless you're splitting it up into donor-advised funds, which has happened. If you're splitting it up into separate private foundations, some states make that quite a little job. But a lot of families, third generation and later, have split up, but they've done it informally. It's still under the umbrella of the original foundation. The money's been apportioned almost like you would discretionary grants, even though each of those units may have a real vetting process for grantees and a good process for choosing grants, etc. They've in essence decided to split it up. One of the things I do when I come across those is to remind families that you may know how that's happened. But if your uncle in a separate branch fund makes a grant determined to be self-dealing, you're all responsible. So one of the real education issues has been, if you've split up informally, please remember the responsibility of the whole board to understand the grant that's going on. And by the way, and I counsel that to families who even got discretionary grants, because I run into some awkward situations where families didn't know what discretionary grants were being made. But the splitting up is something that we're seeing as people wrestle with this. And will it lead them to keep splitting it up? I think this is something that is definitely on my horizon for better understanding. It's a phenomenon that is going a little bit under the radar, but it's going to be a thing.
Sometimes, I think, what you just said reminds me of the accommodations. I think, for example, the Goldman Foundation, Richard Lloyd Goldman Foundation, which systematically spent more than 5%, I mean, it was over a period of years, and then ultimately decided to split it up into three divided children.
And and the other thing that you remind me of, I can remember, okay, it does have something to do with age, but some of you will remember in the early 80s when it was a huge scandal that the Kerr Foundation, the foundation of the former Senator Kerr of Oklahoma and Herb McGee, left his foundation to his 4 sons who had been well brought up to survival of the fittest kind of thing. And when the 4 of them decided they were splitting it into 4 different foundations, this was the early 80s, and this sort of confirmed what everybody thought about family foundations. It was a huge phenomenon. It made the cover of New York magazine, the foundation in Oklahoma splitting up. I won't forget it. I was fascinated by all the coverage. And I knew the Kerr Foundation, and I knew a few of the Kerr brothers, and so this became even more interesting. And it was considered at that time the product of abject failure. If you flash forward 25 years, there are 4 pretty well-functioning foundations and 4 brothers getting along probably a whole lot better than if they'd been forced into conviviality. So who's to say that was a failure? And so I think the process of going through the decision-making is what's important. How healthy is the process? How well-advised are you through the process? But we've come a long way since the Kerr brothers essentially paved the public way for a lot of this to happen. Now, what you'll hear about in a moment, this isn't always the founder's choice. Future trustees may split the foundation up. They may set a spend-out policy, or they can turn over the assets to another entity entirely. And this is happening. For some, it is a large public charity, and for some, it is the notion of public philanthropy, like a donor-advised fund. For some, they find the causes that were dear to the founder, and they're looking at whether or not they want to give just directly to those causes and close it right down. I want to give you some examples, because it's always fun to talk about the who's that have been wrestling with this. So first of all, the who's of why do you choose perpetuity? In all of this is the conversation being positioned that somehow spend down is the better choice. And I would have a real issue with that, because my hope is that it's a really good, strong, thoughtful process for every family, and they make the decision that's right for them. And I think you're going to see this in a couple of the ones that I want to bring up. You want to invest for growth over the long term. It's going to generate increasing flow of charitable capital to address problems now and in the future. The one I want to mention is the Meadows Foundation in Texas. It is the only foundation in the country committed to giving in every county in Texas, including the border counties that are really very vulnerable. Albert Meadows started this off with a $24 million gift. There was a subsequent gift, I think it was in the 50-some million after his death. The foundation has given away well over $600 million throughout Texas, and they have almost $1 billion in assets at this point. They would tell you they would have had a lot more except for 2008, and I could hear them in my ear complaining about that. I have to mention it. The Meadows Foundation would tell you that there would not be anybody in some of those counties if they weren't down there working on these issues. And Albert Meadows' commitment to Texas, and they are required to give in Texas only. But Albert Meadows' commitment was, I want always the people of Texas to benefit from this. He didn't say it had to be this issue or this way, but so the people of Texas may benefit. Another reason to choose it is you want to build the knowledge and experience that may allow the foundation to be more effective in addressing its mission. I've mentioned the David and Lucille Packard Foundation in Los Altos, California. When you think about what they've learned about issues like global population and the environment over time, they've almost themselves become an expert that people turn to for that kind of knowledge. And their grant making is really well guided by what they've been able to learn, not just in those two areas, but the ones that come along. You have the time to tackle deep-seated and complex social problems. And I've mentioned the George Gund Foundation out of Cleveland, Ohio, where they recently, within the last couple of years, even though no family member lives in Cleveland, recommitted to Cleveland with a lovely statement about how they were as much a part of Cleveland's history as Cleveland wasn't theirs. But they know that the problems they're dealing with in Cleveland are almost intractable, and they needed to be in it for the long haul. And so they would make that case. You'll notice I didn't put a name here because I didn't want to tell you that one of the reasons I hear all the time is that people want to create a legacy for what they want to be remembered for. And I either didn't want to name one, or I said everybody. Well, this is the egoist. No. This is what do you really want to be remembered for? And for some people, it is the philanthropy. And the last one, it may engage your family or your community for generations. By the way, I should have mentioned, the Packard Foundation will celebrate its 50th anniversary next year. The CERVNA Foundation will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. By the way, there are family foundations in this country that predate the tax code. So there are some that have been around that long. The CERVNA Foundation has found a way over generations. Oh, it's fifth. They're in fifth. I think there's some sixth that have been born, but the family has been involved. They even created a separate vehicle of foundation for the Andrus Family Philanthropy Program, so more can be more hands-on. Andrus Family, CERVNA backwards, but it is the Andrus Family. So anyway, they've been able to engage your family, and I'll tell you, I'm one of the first to tell most families that it's really hard to do this after the third or fourth generation. And then I have to tell them about that. Why limit the lifespan from the outset, from the beginning? You want to actively participate in your own giving. You've identified a critical opportunity to affect a current issue or problem, and you want to go for it. You believe founders, often entrepreneurs, may be bolder than successors. And I hear this a fair amount from entrepreneurs, the concern that inheritors tend to be a little more cautious. The entrepreneur, I always call it the J.C. Penney syndrome. If I make a fortune and lose a fortune, I'll make another fortune. Inheritors don't think that way necessarily. You get a few where it was definitely in the Kool-Aid, but there's an awful lot of people who believe that inheritors will be more cautious. You fear the change, the bureaucracy, or the lack of respect for your wishes that might follow your death. You don't want to impose your charitable goals on others or burden those who might not have any interest. I hear this one really a fair amount. My children will have the wherewithal, if they want to be donors, be donors. I don't want to decide what I want to give to and then assume that you all will want to necessarily follow in that. This is often a great place to remember the Warren Buffett quote, I want to leave my children enough so they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. We left in some very nice foundations. Why perpetual foundations change course? They see their mission as accomplished or no longer relevant. They found an opportunity to make a bold investment in critical funding area. I'm working with a large foundation, 30-generation foundation in Memphis right now. They came to a point and they said, these three things are happening in Memphis. The time is now. We're spending out this foundation. It was about $70 million on what they called their big bets. And they took those three, and that's what they're spending now. The assets have shrunk. There's a lack of future leaders. Now, if you read this carefully, you'll see there's a lot of stuff in it. Who have the interest, the common ground, and the capacity to find common ground, who feel connected to the focus of the giving. So, for some of you, it may be that there aren't family members. For some, it may not be family members who can identify that common ground. Okay, before I do my little closing thing, I really thought it would be interesting to hear about one specifically and ask Alice if she'd mind just taking a few minutes to talk about Erwin Sweeney Miller. I finished Eckerd already, you don't have to talk about Eckerd.
I actually work with them too, but never.
I know, really. You have worked with them too. But talk to us a little about wonderful Erwin and Clementine's family.
Okay. The Erwin Sweeney Miller Foundation was based in Columbus, Indiana, which is a small town that you may have heard about because it's known for its architectural excellence throughout the years. And Erwin Sweeney Miller he was actually the second generation of the foundation, and he headed the Cummins Engine Company. So that's where the additional money came from. The foundation had been active at a national level in early years. It's been around almost 50 years. And then over recent years, it had been giving mostly in Columbus, Indiana. And at the death of the donor, Mr. Miller, his wife was still alive, but she was no longer able to participate in the foundation. I started working with them and then ultimately wrote his paper, which will be published in the fall. And the family members had no instructions from the donor to spend down. I mean, the assumption in all the papers was perpetuity, although it really had not been discussed. They chose, over a period of time, to spend all the money down by giving it to essentially helping rebuild Columbus, Indiana. So they put it into major infrastructure, community development, all kinds of things like that. Leveraged it. Spend some money to make sure that the family home, which was an architectural gem, was there. Now they made that choice I took a couple notes on what Jenny said earlier. I think there were a couple of reasons. One is they saw something they could accomplish. Their parents had been active in that community. Now, of the 5 Miller children and additional other person who's on the board, only one still lived in Columbus, Indiana. But they've been brought up with this notion that this isn't our money. We're stewarding someone else's money. And so they were able to make this decision to give all the money away to downtown Columbus, Indiana. And in addition, they knew that perpetuity wasn't easy. When you have a foundation that has been run predominantly by a very strong entrepreneur, it's often true that the next generation really doesn't know how to negotiate, get along together, work together very well. It's tough because they haven't had any experience. Someone else has made the decisions, and Daddy's always been there to be the person they could go to. So in addition to seeing this wonderful opportunity, they also didn't think they could do a very good job in the long term of working it out. So they responsibly spent down, phased out the grant makers they were giving to over a period of 3 to 5 years, did a great job of that. Spent the rest of the money in downtown Columbus, Indiana. It took 6 or 8 years to complete the process, and they are no longer there. So it was a great, and working with them was fun. It was great to write this up, and I hope you'll enjoy reading about it when it comes out of the joint publication of this place in the National Center.
And one of the things, thank you, Alice, but one of the things so many of us depend on is how candid families can be when they know other families can learn from their experience. I've never had a donor or a family member turn me down for an interview. I've never had one, and this is in almost 30 years, I've never had one say no if I wanted them to talk to a different family about their experience. People, I think even the foibles, they know that if somebody else can learn from what we did. And I thought the Miller family was incredibly candid, and you see that in that paper. Let me close with something some of you may know Vince Staley. He wrote once for us. I thought it was a wonderful way to do it. He said, although there's some debate in philanthropy about the question of perpetuity, in the end, no single correct approach is right for all donors. The decision to create a foundation for the ages or for the moment is a highly individual choice. It should be guided by the philanthropic goals laid out by donors and their families. The bottom line is that some charitable purposes require urgent attention, and others will plague society for many generations. Philanthropic resources should be available to deal with both types of issues. I thought Fitz did a really nice job with that. But with that, I will close and see if, what the questions and discussions might be.
Great. So, the floor is now open for questions, comments, observations, insights. Who's going to go first?
So do you find that the decision's more personal or more strategic? I.e., it's more like a personal, we want to maintain the name of the foundation, or we're going after these problems and therefore it's going to take a long time and a perpetual is more appropriate, or we have an immediate issue and we want to have a big bang.
I'm going to say that right now, and maybe it's the ones that find me, that for them, I would characterize it as more personal. That may be that they don't yet understand their own goals for affecting the world in some particular place. It might be because they don't know what's the best thing to do for my children or grandchildren, and in that it could be personal. But for a lot of people, I say it is because they're still figuring it out. For a lot of the ones who've made the decisions, and are moving along, they got to that point where they could be strategic. Clarity was there, the sense of mission and purpose. They went through a process like Miller did, and it made that some of the stuff got cleared away that led it to be a much more strategic or mission-driven decision.
Let me just piggyback on Buck. Do you find many for whom you think the reason is they're afraid of the decision making? They don't want to say, no, you don't, your idea doesn't get to happen, or we'll kill off your dream, or...
Right. In terms of volume, I wouldn't say I do many. I found many. I will have to say I have seen plenty, and where they are at that point, they feel very strongly about it. One of the situations that I've seen, and by the way, the notion that founders aren't going to be able to predict what's coming down the road, comes clear when you do something like this. I've seen people who have put close colleagues and friends or business advisors on a board so they would temper their children, and yet they didn't necessarily feel any sense of loyalty. In some cases, they are the only ones that felt a sense of loyalty. My favorite issue, though, Tom, that has to do with this, and I want to go back to the third generation, because this is where I think I'm learning the most. One of the things that happens to a lot of third generation is they decide the only way to do this fairly, and I'm the one that gets to tell them there's no such thing as family fairness. It is an illusion. But the only way to do this fairly is to divide it up among branches of the family. Okay? And the foundation sometimes informally, and sometimes they actually do split it up, but they split it up, interestingly, among the branches created by the second generation. So the family's no longer the family of Tom Lambeth, where the Tom Lambeth family, since you created the foundation, we're the, we're Hunter's Foundation, or whatever it is. And so they do it by branches. And one of the things that parents get into their heads, and I have one next week, so cheer me on, is they think their children are going to make the same decisions they do. So they want their children on the board because they can count on the fact that their children think like they do. Now, I don't know if I can think, but not mine. And so there's this illusion that we have to have branch equity. It has to be split up among branches. It has to be fair. This family is saying we don't want any next generation unless everybody gets one. And when you talk to that generation, they really do think their children. So I think the splitting up can be about, I only want people that are going to make the decisions I do. I've certainly heard them. I just will have to say it's not been the overwhelming number. Now, to be honest, somebody that sure of themselves probably isn't going to call me. Right?
Are there characteristics of the donors who are willing to make these big bets?
First of all, I think there is an entrepreneurial spirit to people who made a lot of money. They know, they just have it in them to be willing to go out a little bit on a limb and make a choice. Then the other thing that I will tell you that I think is special in a lot of family philanthropy, families tend to stick with grantees over a longer period of time. So they get to know the organizations and the leadership well. It becomes a really important relationship. And I think it makes it a little easier for someone to say, I want to bet on something where I've seen the work you've done, I've known the leaders, I have a sense of your values. So there's some of that, it's familiarity, making it a little simpler. But I would have to say it comes down to whatever it is, risk tolerance or the notion of innovation that a lot of entrepreneurs bring to their work.
Does it have to be the person who made the money? So you could have a second generation person who didn't make the money but is entrepreneurial and might...
The one I told you about earlier that was spending down the $60-70 million foundation, it skipped the son, but the grandson has built one of the biggest multinational companies in the world. And he clearly inherited, learned, whatever would not do him a disservice, that skill. And frankly, he set up his own foundation. He didn't think he needed to rely on, and his will ultimately be $2 billion in philanthropy. But he was very supportive of the notion of the big bets when he could have let his grandfather's foundation play out or whatever, or he could have used his grandfather's foundation instead of being philanthropic on his own. But he was very, very supportive of that. So maybe it does every other generation or whatever that truism is.
Just a quick, I don't know how many families decide to put a good deal or all of their money into community foundations,
Right.
which have in perpetuity. How does that work? Kind of break out?
Well, first of all, there's so many. Donor advised funds have been the real energy and vehicle for so many donors. It's opened giving up to a whole new generation. It's opened it up to a broader wealth, income level. And it's also opened up some public charity options for some donors as well. I work with a couple of donor advised funds that have $300+ million in assets. There is a little, I do believe one day we will all have this discussion around donor advised funds and which are, what are the real benefits and how do you get those and which families are using them as a sort of private foundation and public charity clothing. One of the things we're trying to do is to help people understand, for example, if you get to the end of the year and you can't meet your payout responsibly, short of throwing money out the window, if you truly can't make it responsibly, some families put it into their donor advised fund. Now the question becomes, are you putting it in your donor advised fund to leave it there, or are you putting it in there to when you can make a better, more thoughtful decision about where it goes? So we are seeing some questions around it, but there's far more excitement and opportunity. We use it all the time. But there's hundreds of thousands of donor advised funds, and if you look at the fact that so many families find that a really important vehicle, especially if they've moved away from their community. And then you add to that all of the major nonprofits. Harvard has one of the most active, energetic donor advised funds programs out there, and you only have to give half your money to donor.
That's a great
Hospitals are
disappointment.
starting them, and of course the gift funds, which essentially are donor advised funds, but they're being managed by mostly financial institutions, investment institutions, and things like that. We've just seen so many more people involved in philanthropy because of the donor advised fund. And some of those who have done the best job of accounting for what's happening in there, by the way, Fidelity turns out some of the best information on what their donors are doing. And the great news for them is when you look at $2 billion or whatever it is they manage these days, most people replace the money they give away. So it's not you put it in there, it's a stagnant one-time thing. They're getting excited and they're doing more of it. So there's so many more people. The number of family foundations is woefully undercounted. People will say now, I'll hear anything from 60, 70,000, but that's how many the foundation center could put their fingers on. And so the numbers are significant. And as Joel said at the beginning of this, almost all the family foundations in this country have less than $1 million in assets. The issue is, were they badly advised, or are they waiting for an estate event that will ultimately fund that foundation? So the numbers are big.
There's also the hybrid. You've got supporting organizations
Absolutely.
as well. Many universities use as it's different from the donor advised funds, and the university actually has majority control of the boards of those supporting organizations. But Duke has a number of them, Harvard has a number of them. Lots of institutions have supporting organizations. Jewish federations in the U.S. all have supporting organizations, as well as donor advised funds. Donors don't have quite the clear control over those supporting organizations, because the university has the host organization, host institution, has the majority control. But the truth of the matter is, you can structure it as if you want to create it that way. You can structure it to preserve a lot of autonomy on the part of the family as well.
And let me be clear, that only touches the surface of family giving in this country. Most people start their organized giving as a family through their family business. The family business is generally the first place. It certainly was a big place for the Earl Miller family through Cummins Engine. And the vehicle that most of us now are spending as much time as we can better understanding is the family office. The family office, which is set up to manage the affairs of the family frequently after the business is sold. But they may do a number of other things for the family. Usually it's the money managers. But more and more often, according to the Family Office Exchange, 90% of family offices manage some or all of the family's giving. So that's a big piece, and we're beginning to see the interesting issues there. How do the people giving it away, how are they getting along with the people whose job it is to make the money? But you'll be hearing lots more about giving through a family office, so there's lots of options.
Mark,
I'm just interested in 2 points you made. One is the sort of tension between those. You mentioned that a number of families faced with a set of complex social problems that are in their mission scope choose to spend down because of the perceived urgency of it. And then you said others may choose perpetuity because of the wisdom that's gained over time in making those grants. And I'm thinking of fairly large and fairly newly formed foundations who, if they had to do it over again, might have chosen a longer path rather than jumping straight in to address the urgency. So I guess I'm interested in hearing from you and maybe other of the foundation consultants in the room about how do the families make that decision?
I'd love to hear it too. The good news is you can make this decision at any point, when you're petrol. Once it's gone, it is gone. And I will have to tell you, there's a foundation in Wisconsin, the Helen Bader Foundation. When it was set up as a limited lifespan foundation. Helen's son, Dan, runs the foundation now, has for some time. Family's actually well involved. Dan feels like they're just now hitting their stride when it comes to their knowledge of the community, the tools they've tried out that are showing real promise. And he has a big dilemma, you know, because there's some parts of him, I think, that do want to fight. Can we extend this? What can we do? And there's parts of them that go, well, this is what, you know, my mother wanted. But, so I can absolutely tell you there's somebody that decided to spend out and then, you know, is now sort of desperate. Because, and I will say, they are doing some work around the country, around the world for that matter, and they're doing it incredibly well. It's going to be a huge loss when the Bader Foundation.
So I got a question that sort of relates to the larger family foundation, the ones that have staff. I'd be curious to know, as a staff member of the foundation, how does that play out on the staff level? How does this whole conversation affect those folks? Do you see on staff turnover?
Right.
I'm just curious how
It's terrific, and we have written a couple of things about that. We did some staffing studies, and the notion of the Limited Life Foundation came up. And I would ask, after I give you a little overview, I ask Joel, what you had some experience with this. It is an issue that I've seen for the most part handled really well in terms of one foundation that I'm thinking of started 2 years in advance bringing in career counselors, doing training, writing reviews, all kinds of things. It was a really thoughtful process to take care of, and a nice severance, everything was well done. But the truth is, it's really hard for the last year or so of a Limited Life Foundation to have staff, because people leave, they leave, and a lot of CEOs have been struggling with how do you maintain qualified people at that moment where it's really coming together, because somebody's got a great opportunity, and they
say political administrations too, last
yes,
year.
Exactly, and faster than you see.
Tony, feel free to also add in. We haven't seen it in the last years because we're still, Atlantic is coming up on its last grant making year. I think it's 15, isn't it? And that means there'll be a tail of another 3 years or so to pay out the grant, or maybe less, depending on other circumstances. So we haven't seen it at the end. What I can say about the IPI Foundation is very clear. They've said to everybody on the staff, we want you here until the end if you want to stay here. And we'll give you very, very nice financial packages. We'll give you outsourcing consulting advice. We'll do anything you want. We want you to stay until the end. You will stay. And they've kept, since I started working with them, observing them, making annual reports, I think they've lost only one person who they ended up helping. She was offered a job. If the staff is really good, they're going to get a job offer. And the question is, do they take the job offer when it's made, or do they say, well, we'll stay here and talk to you later? It depends on the quality of the job offer. The one person who left the IPI Foundation got a job as vice president of programs at the largest foundation in Israel. And the foundation and the people at IPI gave her very strong recommendations, and I want to say perhaps even lobbied for her. So it really depends. Everybody else, nobody else left the foundation. It's a staff in the U.S. It's a staff of program people probably about 15, and in Israel was probably 10. And the former Soviet Union was very small. But everybody is sick. It depends on the quality and the devotion to the cause, quality of management. What kind of are they really enjoying what they do? Do they have a strong cause commitment to what they're doing? Tony, you've had different experience.
Well, it's similar to what you described. Atlantic is doing something that gives us the opportunity to study this issue over some period of time, and that is that they are closing down some programs much sooner than others, and making a lot of comparative choices among what should stay on for 2015 and what should go this year. And they're closing down 2 major programs this year. Lots of staff going out the door, and they went through a period where every month or 2, people were getting more farewell emails, which was really not sustainable from a morale point of view.
I might just interrupt just to give you a little bit of context. Now, the High Foundation, when we started spending down, had about $800 million. And it's now, I mean, they spent out slowly, they still have somewhere between $600 or $700 million. They've been spending down for 5 years. Atlantic, when it first started, at its peak, it had $6.5 billion. And it now has, and when it started the actual spend out, it was more like $4 billion, right? 4.5.
Well, I think maybe closer to 5.
$5 billion. Well, you know, the issue, one of the issues in spend out, just to complicate it even more, is, you know, if you've got a really good investment management function, they keep, their job is to make money. Their job is not to make the least money you can make. It's to make the most money you can make. So how do you get, one of the real tasks, as Tony does grow up, Atlantic spent down for 5 years, and it was spending down, but it was making as much money as it was spending down. And so at the end of 5 years, they had about the same amount of money that they had when they started spending. So it's a real problem.
Yeah. They are actually well past that point now. And that's partly because they're now down to a portion of their endowment that is partly the liquid. And so that there's a lot more money in there than there is liquidity, and they have to be much more careful of how they manage that last piece of it. But the human resources side, what's interesting here is that for years, Atlantic has gone through spasms of anxiety about this issue of people leaving too soon. And they went through several different approaches to retaining people's loyalty, including some initially ad hoc but very generous retention bonuses, all of which turned out to be unnecessary. They expired last year, and everybody that had been offered them is still there. So that the anxiety that people are feeling comes on the day when they're told what their final date will be. And it is primarily an anxiety of separation. It's not an anxiety about what am I going to do next. Now, they have substantial staff in places where what I'm going to do next can be a real problem, particularly Ireland, where you can only imagine becoming unemployed tomorrow in Ireland after having had a comparatively cushy job and a fun one in philanthropy.
In the largest foundation in the country.
Yes, that's by far the largest foundation, the one of only 3, the other 2 of which are small, that they have virtually no staff, family foundation. So you can't really get into them unless you were born in them. So a career in philanthropy in Ireland is almost unthinkable for most of the staff. And even so, they're staying in Atlantic and committed to doing so. All this anxiety about people wanting to walk out the door ahead of time has been misplaced. Now, Atlantic has just started to think about some people that they really need to stay to the bitter end. And whether those few people, when all is said and done, there are going to be a couple of programs that last right till the last day. How do we keep those people? And understandably, each of those is a different story. Some of them might be close enough to retirement age so that if we just make them good to 65, they'll be happy. Others are so young that it may be that they want to go off, and Atlantic will calve off a piece of its endowment, send it off with them, and let that portion of the work carry on under someone else's aegis. So there are individual decisions being made for those critical people. But for the great bulk of the staff, there is a devotion to the job that's almost on a parallel with people in the arts. I'm being paid to do what I love.
So does anyone think about what I would call outsourcing, which is to say, look, we know that we're going to end at this point, but we have work that has to be done. So do we then transfer those programs over to, sort of Warren Buffett style or whatever, to another foundation?
Or to an operating charity.
Yes, or to an operating charity. Right. With the Big Bets Foundation in Tennessee, they're choosing to build capacity in operating charities. They're choosing to the fact work can be continued and it will be, it'll be funded.
But it's such an interesting thing because High Foundation is resisting doing that because they feel that the founder, Sanford Bernstein, was determined not to create a perpetual entity. And if you transfer endowment to another organization, it's a cop-out. And so, I mean, they can face the question and say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give endowments. The only endowment they're giving is to the institution they created in Israel called the Avichai, Beit Avichai, House of Avichai. And that's an educational and cultural institution. And they're giving that, at the end, they're going to, the last grant will go to that. They're aiming for $130, $140 million, something like that.
And I will say, in the case of the big bets donors, they did not meet those endowment gifts. They needed restricted grants to do certain work for a period of time.
Jerry?
Of the foundations you work with regularly, Jenny, or for that matter, all three of you, are you finding more addressing the question of perpetuity or not?
Without a doubt. Now, the number is still a few, if you poll family foundations and you get a decent response, you're still going to hear that 80% or so expect to exist in perpetuity. But it's helpful to know that 15 years ago that number was 92%. So there has been a fair amount of change in a short time. Overwhelmingly, people are still choosing perpetuity. But I find it is more and more a conscious conversation than it ever was.
Maybe perpetuity in principle until you get to the practicalities of it with multiple generations.
Well, our foundation went through this very discussion to choose perpetuity or not. It was a fascinating experience, and we haven't even touched, I think you guys could be here for the next 3 hours and still not get too far below the surface of all the wonderful issues that are involved. But there's even, in my case, there's a funny upside or other side to the question of what to do about staff who are going to be there. In our case, I realized that at my particular age at the time, that if the foundation chose to be in perpetuity, and I, of course, am not going to be in perpetuity, then there are all kinds of succession issues that have to be worked out that, you know, we had to address and so on. And that was another interesting aspect of this that makes for some good stories maybe later on.
I actually want to go where Jerry was going here. I find now that I believe, based a lot on what you've said, that I believe that foundations should seriously consider the issue of perpetuity at least every 10 years and at all major transitions. So that's what I recommend to my clients, that it should be on the table as an official issue, because unless you take it on as a direct issue, you're not really facing the possibilities of the issues. I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, but that's what I think to me.
You know, the issue is really a different issue with respect to family foundations. I mean, I've been on boards of foundations where there were no family members. And, you know, the default position is to go on existing in perpetuity. Because there's really nobody there. Everybody, it's self, the board appoints the successors in staggered terms, and there's a kind of momentum that just goes for perpetuity. Where you have the problem is really in the family foundations, when you got the differences that grow up with the family. We won't ask Mary to talk about that, but you know, the truth is that when you have they've had a very harmonious foundation. So I'm not suggesting there's a problem there, but we've all, those of us who are engaged in this boards, family foundations, know that it's all over the map, the way in which families deal with it. I've been on one family foundation board where the transition from a checkbook philanthropy by the founders smoothly transitioned through a professional executive director who was selected when the founders were alive to their 3 children. And everything is fine, it's beautiful, they're doing wonderful things, they're doing strategic things. Now I've been on another family foundation board in which the children, one branch of the family couldn't get along with the children, even with the children of that branch, much less children of the other branch. And we had to collapse the foundation. It was a 2-tier foundation. We were members, and we divided it up into 2. It's all over the map. And there's no way of generalizing, except you, Jenny, knows that.
No, there is not generalizing, but I want to give you, you know, people come to me, and the first thing I tell them is, I don't have the answers for you, but I have questions. And I would view the question of perpetuity exactly like, should I give bigger grants and fewer of them, or should I give fewer grants and more of them? Any question, people come to me with lists of the questions they have, and I ask them, put the list down. Tell me what you want to accomplish with this philanthropy. What's important to you? Why did you start it? What do you want going? Then, based on a real understanding of what you want, now let's look at those questions and say, does the question of perpetuity help me achieve my programmatic objectives? Does it help me achieve my objectives for my family? You know, so it's based in something, and that's the kind of process Alice was describing. When a family came to me and they said, you know, we've decided to spend it down, and it was a combination of a lot of things, with the anxiety being high among them. And one of the family members looked at me and said, we're one of those failures you can now talk about. And I was like, and I always disguise them, by the way. Except I tell everybody, when it comes time to fund my retirement, I'm writing a memoir and all bets are off. Just to know. But I said to this family, you've been doing really good work for about 40 years. You went through a really thoughtful process to decide you could have continued to do this, that everybody was unhappy, work wasn't particularly remarkable. You made a really good decision. You have a good spend down plan. This is not a failure. The decisions that were right at a point in time are no longer right. And this isn't just a way to soothe somebody's ego. This is a way to make people comfortable with, if a new time calls for a new choice, make the choice. And I really do think you can help people by just asking them. Because I don't think, as Vince would say, we're not going to sit here and decide this is the answer, and so we want to get more people to do this. Even though there's a lot of proselytizing that goes on, you know, but I actually find that helpful, because that's people's passions talking. And if you're interested in more of this, several people have done a good job of writing up about their spend down. When you were talking, I was thinking about the French American Charitable Trust did a really terrific piece. I was a reader reviewer. It was thoughtfully done, but there's lots of them. More are being done now, so there's information out there. Belden's very.
So this isn't exactly a choice about perpetuity, and maybe more of a question for Alice. Your firm also works with family businesses, is that right? So my question was about how much has there been research kind of comparing this transition, particularly from a founder of a business or of a foundation to successive generations? Because I would think that there would be lots of similarities, either in the type of entrepreneur who's the founder, and there may be some lessons for foundations. And I guess that the parallel choice, perhaps, for a family-owned business would be whether to sell the business at some successive point. But I think that there could be lots of interesting cross-fertilization or something, particularly for family philanthropy, to learn, well, how have family-owned businesses that have made it through generations, what is it that they've done to help make that be a successful process? And you think of, like, I mean, I don't even know if Johnson & Johnson really is a family-owned company, except for that's their advertising tagline.
Well, there's two Johnson companies, too, they get
there's
very
several
confused.
very large businesses out
Right.
there that still have family
Absolutely.
involvement, and I'm sure there's a gazillion of smaller
Right.
businesses that have successfully navigated this and remained, you know, they have the force of the market, unlike foundations, which can remain in perpetuity and be totally ineffective. But
Alice, your group.
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, family business does a tremendous amount of research, and we can learn from that, and we should learn from that, because they've put tons of money in family business research, so you can learn a lot from that. Secondly, the first thing that occurred to me when you said that is that the family businesses that have succeeded over time have also put a lot of resources and money into building family leadership, family structures, family capacities, the kind of dollars that in some ways wouldn't be appropriate for family foundations, but that are sometimes stinted on the family foundation side. So there's a whole different culture of how you think about the family and a family business, because you think about these as owners of this company. and we have a different culture when we think about family foundations.
But it's interesting that you said that, Mary, because in the mid-1980s, when I wanted information on family foundations and everyone was turning me down, I went to talk to the family business folks, the John Wards, the Peter Davises, the Yvonne Lonsbergs, and Kellen Gersigs, who've been studying family enterprise, and said, can I get you, are you interested in turning your attention to what happens when the family doesn't have quite that same bottom line? And so most of our original research was done by those folks. But I think there is a big difference in a family business when a family member is not performing. My general experience is they are out. If you are not performing on a family foundation, you either may be more tolerated, or nobody wants to do anything to hurt your feelings, or more importantly, we really don't want to rock the boat so everybody gets to stay. So there's some very, very interesting things that can happen.
I'll just say one more thing. My observation would be from just one foundational story, but part of that you said that the fear was that successive generations would be less bold, and I think at least with Ms. Reynolds and Tom can agree or disagree with this. It's interesting because we're about half family and half non-family members, and that we're seeing that the role of the family is to keep the values of the foundation as progressive and as bold alive, and that oftentimes it's the non-family members who want to stick to tradition and support the Wake Forest University, support kind of the legacy institutions, and the family members are saying, no, we don't, they need to survive on their own. So it's just been this really, so we're getting really clear, our job is the 75th anniversary of the foundation, and we've been going around the state, and remembering that the very first grant ever made by the Reynolds Foundation in 1936 was to partner with the Public Health Department in North Carolina to educate North Carolinians about venereal disease across the state. And I always say, if that isn't permission to take on any issue, start attack, bring it on.
That really does bring up an interesting question, because as I think about what you just said, and I think about what I know about the rest of the country, the combination of families that are geographically focused in their foundation is a totally different phenomenon than families that are not geographically focused.
And that's not a question for discussion.
No,
That's in our charter.
Yes.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
But when I think about the
huge pressure, absolutely.
Cleveland, not totally limited to Cleveland.
No, they're not. I go to nobody else, but they've got a terrific staff. But no.
So there's an interesting, because you have that same anchor there, the two other things going together, the strong commitment to place and the strong commitment of family members to ensuring that place is served in all that it does. Very interesting. When you had your hand up, and
It's okay.
I forgot to take you.
No, it's really fine. I have your words ringing in my ear of, all over the map, and I know that the answer to my question is it's all over the map, but maybe there's a trend here. If more and more foundations, family foundations, are looking at such a serious question as of perpetuity, is there any correlation with where they're getting their advice about what is a impactful investment? How do we think about this? Are people becoming more, this isn't quite what I mean, but professionally advised on impact and those kinds of things?
There's certainly a lot more conversation about evaluation and impact. They are very much aware of that. I have a book you can read.
Yeah.
and so they are more aware of that. I'm going to calm down and tell you, I'm not going to tell you it's all over the map, but I'm going to sort of split the map up a little bit.
Okay.
The first is an issue for around here. Some foundations that have been doing some remarkable work have spent out. And it almost is that angst at the end of it that we really are doing this great work, or we really are in this rather obscure area. For a lot of people, if you are an entrepreneur making this decision, I think it does have to do with what you want this to be, what impact you want to have, what you want your legacy to be. I don't think it's about professional guidance, it's about impact. When I see it more in the third and fourth generation, for the most part, I'm not seeing people that overall are happy with the way the philanthropy has been going. And so they see that as a sign that there's something wrong. Now, how do we course correct that? When Mary was talking, I was thinking, about that, that very thing that you get, families at the table, and she says, okay, we're all now in North Carolina. Well, I see families all the time that, well, they respect the fact that there's a base, but I want to give them Boston, and I want to give them Palm Beach, and I want to give where I live, because there's these, the beginnings of, and I'm going to use a very strong word, but because I hope it gets out there somewhere, the beginnings of sort of the entitlement of because I live here, and the family begins to wrestle with that. To what extent are we here to accommodate all these people, and to what extent are we here to serve a family's philanthropy? So I think the role of consultants that are doing work like Alice is doing has become incredibly important to our field in the last 20 or so years. There are not nearly enough of them doing a lot of the process work. Many of the ones that put out a shingle want to do the grant making work, but they maybe don't want to get into governance. All things flow from governance, so there aren't. So I don't know yet that some of those people talking about impact are influencing this yet. The third generations, it's more, this is not what we thought it was going to be for a lot of them. Or it's not what we know it could be. And first generation is more, what do I want this to be? And then I will give some advice to those of you who use some of these consultants, especially those talking about impact and making good grants and having good process. Keep your language open to all kinds of vehicles. Unfortunately, some of the people who are carrying some really interesting messages and important messages about evaluation, about impact, about really thinking about what you want to accomplish with precious, scarce private resources, will say things about family, or they will tell you who's doing it well. And so you can put people off. And I've seen some people shut folks down. I saw a plenary not that long ago in a family conference, and this person on that podium was making a lot of assumptions about the way she knew it had to be done, and clearly did not embrace family participation or passions or ideas or commitments in that. And she lost 500 people that she didn't have to lose. So I always want to go, but I just caution, I think they could have a better impact if they better understood the family network.
Well, any other questions? Very, very stimulating to me in any event. And I hope you all enjoyed it as well. So I think we should thank them. Let me say that our next FIRG second FIRG will take place on the 2nd of October. And we'll have, that's my conflict. Rebecca Reinbold, the president of the Free Travel Trust. I think that the Free Travel Trust is one of the most interesting foundations in the United States. They've done, in terms of the breadth of what they've done, it's a singular entity. They converted it. I'm sorry, what? It's not, I was going to say, right. It's not a private, but with all practical purposes, it operates like a foundation. But it was a foundation. It was a nest of seven foundations, which then converted, because it was a nest of 7 foundations, into a public charity. So, but the fact is, it's operating very much like a foundation, much more operating foundation kinds of styles of initiatives, but still doing a lot of grant making. So Very, it's fascinating, fascinating story.
And if you have the chance to ask her, Rebecca does, to your point, Mary, a beautiful job of talking about the Pew family and its entrepreneurial values and how those still play out in the way that they do their work.
It is one of the most unlikeliest stories that you would, they really, I mean, when you think about the board, who the trustees were of the Pew Charitable Trust when Rebecca became CEO, and you think about where they've come from since then, it's almost a magical transformation. And it has a lot to do with Rebecca's capacity to do that, which is why she's been the leader that she's been.
Well, and because, when Jeremy Nowak was here, and then, which it seemed like he was trying to do an equally transformational kind of thing, but it's also a Pennsylvania-based kind of, that's Hughes, right?
Well, Hughes is now.
But anyway, so then, like,
yeah, they announced their search. Yeah.
But
Those counts. Then, by the way, those of you interested, Pew announced, William Penn announced a very different executive model yesterday. Yes, they've announced that what they're going to be searching for is a managing director. They very much like the people who have risen to the roles of vice president of program, vice president of investments, and vice president of finance and administration. They've chosen a corporate model that can mobilize those three and the board. So they're not looking for a person who comes in and says, this is my vision for philanthropy. This is not looking for, this is what I'm going to do. They're looking for a managing director. And I will have to say, based on what their experience has been, this is probably a wise model.
For those of you who weren't here when Jeremy said, it was perfectly clear. He knew what the problem was. The problem was that the trustees wanted a low profile, somebody who was not going to shake things up. And yet they picked the guy in Philadelphia who was shaking most things up with the hire as president. And he knew that there was that disjunction between the styles. And he hinted that he might not be there for very long. He should not. 2 months later, 1 month later, after smoking right from this very place, they fired him. In any event.
Okay, now for those of you who are on my board, I don't want this to become a trend.
It's great. Nice to see you again.
I will send you a